Hello, everyone. Welcome to this second part of the Distortion Series 4th edition. We saw in the first part some project about the technosphere made by the students. And now it's the second part, and it's something closer to my own practice. I'm Nicolas Nova, one of the professors here at the Media Design Master Program. And it's close to my practice because it's a project that I've done with Nicolas Nova and Maria Rochowska of Disnovation.org, who are with us today. And the idea of this, roughly 30 minutes presentation and certainly like a few minutes afterwards for question. The idea is to go through this bestiary of the Anthropocene, a project that we've done in the last 5 years or so, quite a long period of time, and to give you some kind of introduction about the motivation behind this project, the logic, how we did it, the kind of logic we adopted and method. We certainly spent time also on some of the specimen we chose for the bestiary, some of our favorites. And obviously project about the future of related to this work, and then your question. As you can see from the images in the background, this project is a compilation of different specimens which are in between nature and the artificial. And the logic behind this bestiary is obviously the one of a compilation with a certain number of texts from authors we invited, people like Anna Tsing, the American anthropologist, Benjamin Bratton, Michel Lusseau, French geographer, Alexandre Monin, French philosopher, and Mathieu Dupéret, Pauline Briand, and others that I'm forgetting here. But the idea of this project was to somehow showcase a series of specimens about this like geological era called the Anthropocene. So as I have like a sort of dual role of being like sort of the moderator and also editor of this, co-editor of this project, I will start by giving the virtual microphone to Nicolas and Maria so that they explain their motivation, and I will do some kind of back and forth between Nicolas and Maria and myself to go through the different topics that I mentioned a few minutes ago.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, as our motivation as artists, already with Disnovation Collective, often we are working on underreported stories, and we are casting kind of critical eye on societal changes in relation with technology and technological issues. And also we were quite interested with current issues and the fact that the Anthropocene was the moment where a review on what nature is shifted totally, like the perception of what could be a nature, technology was totally changed. So we started talking with the conversation with Nicolas Nova, like 4 years ago, and on this aspect of nature, technology, hybridity. And yeah, we realized that these hybrids are not anomalies or something, an accident or something rare, an exception, but it's became normalized. It's became something which is common, and that somehow it needs its own glossary because it's already there. So we thought to create kind of update of a cloud atlas with geoengineering project. So kind of update on what's present in this sphere. So we just find a way to compile and what's already exists.
Yeah, okay, so maybe I can add a few words. I guess, in a sense, we all feel that we are in a certain stage of artificiality, and to some extent, this artificiality, we could argue that the artificiality is global nowadays. So that in many regards, in many layers of consequence of human-made technologies and development, you can recognize levels of artificiality around you. So this artificiality comes as well from let's say the chemical components that are traveling through bodies and atmosphere and minerals, and that are somehow shared with all the living and non-living on Earth. You can also see it through the circulation of atomic radiation that starts to affect all the living and non-living on Earth as well. And you can really see like this movement of a becoming artificial of the globe or the planet in many regards. So somehow the intuition with the book and the sort of stimulation for developing the project with Nicolas was also this idea that we all kind of sense that there is a very advanced level of artificiality, but sometimes that we fail to recognize or we fail to identify or that we could tend to identify only as anomalies and not as a new constituent dimension of our shared reality. So that's where sort of the motivation started, I guess.
Yeah, and probably on my side, I should add that I have a more like a anthropologist, like a researcher in social sciences, but my background originally is in natural sciences, biology, geology, and then I moved to technologies with computer science. And in the last probably 6-7 years, even though I spend most of my time observing the usage of digital technologies, I was more and more intrigued by this kind of like spectrum between the artificial and the natural that one can observe in the everyday environments. Like I go hiking in the mountains and I often find some strange stones or find some like trees shaped antennas, like phone antennas shaped like trees. And this to me was a kind of signal of an interesting period that we live in. And it's, of course, it's related with the environmental crisis. And this project started from this kind of interest in this kind of hybridization. So what we, and the occasion of working with Maria and Nicolas a few years ago came up with an exhibit at the Musée du Jeu de Paume in Paris, and then another exhibit in Montreal at Eastern Bloc in a festival. And we somehow, I mean, from the sort of collection of like hybridized specimens that I started to compile and the interest that Nicolas and Maya had, we started focusing on a way to somehow account for, give some kind of like representation of those hybrids. And the occasion of turning that into a book arrived a bit later in a discussion with Onomatope, the Dutch designer based in Eindhoven, a discussion with Frick Lohm. And this was the occasion to turn those like sort of elements from different exhibits with posters, with visuals into a book, and obviously a book that can also act as a, well, as an exhibit basically. And here you can see in the background a list of the different specimens that we had organized with kingdoms, as in natural sciences, where you have the kingdoms of animals, plants, minerals, and also others that are not necessarily, that do not necessarily correspond to existing living beings. But this kind of things that you have here in the background, it's not something that we had beforehand. It's something that was built over time based on the collection and the compilation of different species, specimens, living ones or artificial ones. And that's like a shared effort that we had with Nicolas and Marianne and myself. And it's, I have to say that this I mean, it started quite, it was quite a very wide effort. We started with collecting objects that existed project done by artists or speculative designers, things that we saw in the environment. And eventually we somehow, well, tried to converge and select a certain number of specimens that are not necessarily exhaustive, but that could be representative or relevant to describe phenomena related with the Anthropocene. And another element that I think is important to add in terms of like the logic, the method beyond the motivation, was that we quite quickly we were interested in finding a proper format to illustrate and to convey this kind of representation. And one of the format that well, was both exciting for us, but also relevant with regards to these specimens was the medieval bestiary. That's one of the reasons we call that the bestiary of the Anthropocene, because bestiaries, especially in the Middle Ages, were a very interesting kind of books that at the time, like I was about to say scientists, but at the time it was like the pre-modern era. So they were not exactly scientists, but theologians and like intellectuals would collect many examples of like living species that they were interested in, documenting their relationship with nature. Some would be like existing ones, like horses or lions or pigs, and some others would be more, I mean, existing for those people, but we know nowadays that they did not exist, like unicorns or dragons. And interestingly, for theologians at the time, bestiaries were sort of a compilation of nature that living creatures that exist on this planet, and each of them were represented by visuals and text, with a certain kind of interplay between like the nice drawing that existed in medieval bestiaries and text that were both descriptive and also analytical in terms of like telling the kind of moral implications of living with hedgehogs or with lions and unicorns. And those kind of little texts close to images, I mean, we're kind of strikingly interesting for us to use that as a starting point to develop a new kind of bestiary that is not just about existing beings, but also beings that are in between the artificial and the natural. So probably you can comment on the format, Nicolas and Maya, about like this kind of bestiary choice and the kind of like visual format we discussed.
For us, it was important. So yeah, the content of the book and what is it about is visible on the form, on its shape. So we were, of course, obviously inspired by bestiaries, but as well like biodiversity literature, which is very generously illustrated often, and there is this kind of the illustration which with all descriptions and kind of technical illustrations inside. Also, it was inspired by this, but also by the pocket field guide. We really wanted it to look like you can just take it with you in the pocket and go to your field research and look you can potentially identify these specimens in their natural habitat. So this was like all this field, which was very interesting. Also, we were interested in, of course, the reference Flasser and Beck, donc Vampirotetis Infernalis, which is more like poetical or philosophical approach to this, but the illustrations and the format and was very inspiring for us. And as you said before, also we imagine when we work on a book, often we try to imagine at the same time what it could be as an art exhibition, as we are artists and designers at the same time. So so we've been really wanting it to be like quite of rich in visual references. The illustrations are full page. It's kind of, the structure is systematic. You have always like left page, full page illustration, right page, like a label, like a wall label with description of the specimen. So, so this is the first part. And the second part is more like a critical, it's called observations. And like Nicolas said, it's 10 contributions from different artists or authors. And it's more like if it was an exhibition and there was a panel and people would comment or bring some new point of view on the exhibition. So this is like the complementary part. Which is also like a more critical, because the first part is factual. We have these objects which are always also like specimen in the galleries, like often like isolated one object in the page. So yeah, this is just like a main inspiration, formal inspirations. Yeah, I don't know if you want to add something.
Yeah, I guess there is always a quite subtle balance between the limits of how exhaustive you can be in such a book and how little is enough and relevant for considering it as a meaningful compilation. So basically, what we did try to do is not to tend for sort of an exhaustive collection, but rather to sort of catch the main typologies or the main categories of those hybridity let's say gradients. Because I mean, somehow you will find in the book different gradients or different situations of hybridity and different levels of hybridity. And basically what we did try to achieve is more like to have sort of an overview of those shapes and types and gradients of hybridity, and sort of lead people to sort of a developed level of attention to their surrounding by putting up front those some, let's say, some specimen of each of those families of hybridity. So each of those specimens is sort of an invitation to recognize around you other beings of this family of hybridity or this type of hybridity. So basically, along the pages, you will recognize all those places where technology, vegetables, minerals, gases, and clouds are sort of in different levels meshing together, and each of those are really like an invitation to recognize many other shades of those hybridity situations in daily life. So that's somehow the sort of status of field book that you can identify with the bestiary is that it's more like an invitation to move around and learn about those different types and continue the observation and continue the collection and continue the developed sort of attention to the weird presence that we are sort of living through.
Yeah, there's I mean, one of the person to whom we asked the text for this book is Anna Tsing, the American anthropologist from UC Santa Cruz, and I mean, in her work, she tries to like show how we need us human beings to develop what she called ways of paying attention to the ways of being in the world around us. And for us in this book, the idea was to certainly to give a certain account of hybridity in the Anthropocene, but also, as Nicolas just mentioned, to invite people to realize that there are certain categories of hybridities, like for instance the animals which are like like there are problems because of plastic and the presence of plastic in the environment. So of course, this example of microplastic saturated fish is like stunning and problematic, but this is something one can also observe in other kind of environment. And by looking at those pages, by looking at the visuals, like the captions and the text, our intention was to, well, help people to realize that they could notice those things, which are, I mean, sadly not, I mean, the majority of the hybridization that we described in this book are quite problematic. Some might be a bit less problematic, but most of them are. And the intention was to show with a series of examples, as in the case of the bestiaries in the Middle Ages, that those cases could tell stories that are important for us. So in a way, it's a never-ending kind of process. And what we did here, it's a project that we did between 2015 and last year. But I mean, in 10 years there will obviously be others. And the point is not the selection of like an exhaustive set of examples, but more as a kind of prompt to understand those issues. And one other thing that I wanted to mention about the format, as you can see, it's inspired by the bestiary in the sense that it's a mix of images with short text that describes some elements, more or less moral elements about the species, but it's also inspired by the modern kind of representation, the scientific representation in natural sciences. And we try to find some kind of balance between this pre-modern representation of the bestiary and the like more scientific representation, and play with this kind of ambiguity. We know that anthropologically speaking, that probably the way nature and humans have been like separated, as if they were like two different genres. But we know that we as human beings belong to nature, and we are close to other kind of living beings, but also other kind of like geological beings which used to be living beings, for instance, certain kind of stones, or if you think about petrol and gas, which was obviously like living beings a million years ago. So the idea of putting that on the same page, we have like, and the human beings are in the bestiary as well, but you have like insects, you have stones, you have vegetables, you have like totally artificial product like Tamagotchis. I mean, this is here to remind, even the big dog that you can see here from Boston Dynamics, all those things have a relationship with what used to be called nature. Like this robot was made possible because of extractive processes with minerals, certain kind of energy based also on which, I mean, certain creatures which died a million years ago, and there's a connection between all those things, and that for us was important to put everything on the same page, because that's what we are as human beings on this planet. And the book is an invitation to consider that kind of more than human perspective, I think.
Yeah, in a way also you can observe in each chapter a sort of gradation of levels of hybridity in some ways. So that's one of the rules we use to organize the specimens in the pages. So you can see in each chapter sort of increasing level of human-made consequences or human design, and the level in which this hybridity takes the forefront. That's the way we organize the four chapters that are based on specimens.
Probably we can give our favorites. Which are your favorites, Maria?
Well, I like the minerals chapter because for me it's like a kind of sign of how human and the Anthropocene modifies environment. Is kind of symptomatic for the Anthropocene epoch, like especially the atomic age minerals and things like anthropogenic craters, which are made, which are side effect of nuclear testing, and now they are like cosmic scale visible objects, or related with it trinited minerals, which are the totally different scale outcome of this process. And they are like glassy residues on the desert after the testing, nuclear bomb testing, and they are more like 1 centimeter large. And so this how it's a mineral chapter is kind of nice, showing the different scales and also how the human is impacting the environment, the whole planet somehow. So yeah, I think this one is very nice. Like it's showing how it's the huge impact, and yeah, it's like a marker of the Anthropocene.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you, Nicolas?
Because that's one of those elements that sort of are super obvious and almost naturalized in our daily environments, and to such level that to me it's one in this large family of human-made elements that are shaping our daily lives and directly basically inspired or mimetic of biological processes, but they tend to sort of signify to me a replacement, a sort of a replacement, gradual replacement of the diversity of ecological entities, and this sort of becoming artificial, where large families of elements are replaced or slowly meshed by new human-made elements. So somehow, to me, it's in the family of the same with the fordytes, this sort of new mineral that has been that has emerged from the car industry, where, let's say, in Detroit, you will have 100 years of cumulative layers of car paint adding on the top of each other, and to such an extent that it actually ended up creating a new sort of mineral components. And to me, this typology of artificiality is quite interesting, because it sort of crystallized this moment where artificial agents are taking their own autonomy and yeah, really start being actors in our daily lives in a way.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, in my case, one of my favorites is the one we just saw, the antenna trees. This whole series of trees that have been designed to look like, I mean, antennas that look like trees, and designed to somehow conceal their nature by being close to like sometimes it could be palm trees if you're in California, or it could be certain species of trees in the Italian Alps. And what I find both fascinating and curious with this kind of structure is that it's beyond like the sort of modernist kind of infrastructure that we used to have in the 20th century, where like electricity poles or like big like infrastructures were designed with steel and concrete in a way that people could notice that human beings have taken control of their environment. Here, it's as if there's this notion that in order to keep this infrastructure, they should be close to their environmental surroundings, and that they should be turned into something green and acceptable, which of course is a pale version of a tree, because the leaves never fall, the color after a while being a bit scratched up, it's you can see that it's not really natural, so to say, and it looks like tree leaves, but you have weird shapes. So there's something like deeply disturbing in this kind of elements that I mean, in Switzerland where I live, for instance, this is forbidden, but it's not the case of every country. So that I think it's this kind of case is I mean, it catches our attention in a way that it forces us to rethink the kind of relationship we want to have with nature. And probably a second species that I'm interested in are the plastiglomerates. Plastiglomerates, it's the term is a neologism, sort of portmanteau word made of plastic and agglomerate. So it's typically basaltic stones that exist near volcanoes, but they also contain plastic that was melted, or plastic object that were melted at the same moment that the lava got colder and took its shape. So it's a mix of what is called a metamorphic process. In geology, it's when you have this kind of fluid like volcano lava that turns into a stone, and mixed with human-made elements, like here, like a lighter, for instance. Or the other day I was in Zurich for an exhibit, and I saw a project by an artist who put smartphones in lava to create strange shapes. I'm not sure the ethic of this is quite positive, but I think this kind of example is striking as a case of how geological processes now illustrate also how human activity is a material force into like creating minerals, and that somehow is a perfect example of the Anthropocene. I see that the time is flying, and we have like almost like 5 or 6 minutes. So probably, and I see that we have 2 questions, but probably Nicolas and Maria, do you have like, in terms of follow-up project, do you have any thoughts about how the work we did on this can lead to other projects that you are working on?
For now, our initial idea of the exhibition is kind of materializing. We have several exhibitions, like of the illustrations, like in Geneva this summer at Orangerie, Théâtre de l'Orangerie, and opening 8th of May in Verona in Fonderia 209. And also, yeah, the book will be translated in French, and normally maybe next year. Yeah.
Sure, and I mean, it somehow fits in a larger set of projects that we've been developing for the last 2 years. That sort of investigates the friction lines between economic growth and ecological crisis. So we are developing this series of projects that fits in the under the name post-growth, where we are basically developing sort of a toolkit to change perspectives and change our sort of ways of thinking and representing what transition or social transformation could be like in a sort of post-growth society. So that's kind of the main, I would say, field of experiment we are working in that resonates highly with the bestiary in a way.
Yeah, and in my case, probably a follow-up project is to explore this kind of hybrids and this kind of little stories about human-made infrastructures and nature, like connected. I try to continue this kind of work in the context of exploring the Alps And I have a text coming up next year. It's mostly a field, some kind of field research or sort of creative ethnography made of different fragments of textual observation about such kind of situation in the context of the mountains in the Alps. And probably also in a project about the future of the Chamonix area in the Alps as well. So that's for me a way to continue this kind of like axis of research about like technology / nature hybridization. Let me check. I see that there are like questions, so it's probably like a few minutes before the end. 2 questions. So yeah, there's one question: where can we get this book? So obviously, this can be found in different places. It can be found on the website of our publisher, Onomatope, in the Netherlands. But normally, it's released in Europe in bookshops. So if they're not in the bookshop, they could be ordered from bookshops. Generally, bookshops in some museums can certainly have a copy. And we've been told that the distribution in North America will be starting next week for people listening from North America who are kind of afraid by shipping costs. It's going to be distributed starting next week in bookshops and by a North American distributor. And there's a second question by Douglas, who mentioned like Deleuze and Guattari's 1000 plateaux, 1000 plateaus, in which the authors suggested a compelling conceptual model of how technology could be studied as a pseudo-phylum. Phylum means like a tree. It's like studying technologies as I put things like quite quickly, but as a sort of genealogy tree. And Deleuze and Guattari propose some examples of how one would go about such a classification. Douglas says that our project seems to have its own origin, but he sees some intriguing connection, and in some ways, this project could be seen as a more concrete exploration of this approach. Do you have a comment on this, Nicolas or Maria? I do have some, but
yeah, sure. I mean, one way I could comment on that is that basically we all went through a lot of very theoretical and abstract observation and writings about the Anthropocene and the era we are living in. But with the book, we really wanted to have sort of a grounded, materialist and observation-based approach to sort of propose another side of how we could assess and make sense of this contemporary situation. So it's really sort of a grounded, bottom-up observation process, as opposed to a sort of top-down theory and generalized view on the situation. So I guess we kind of built this book from the ground and from the field observation.
Yeah, but I do think that the remark that Douglas made is also relevant to, I mean, based now on what we did. It's kind of interesting to realize that another way to analyze the categories we had or the specimen we had could be probably to start seeing some connection between one another. For instance, when I mentioned the antenna trees, or there are some chapters, some specimen about artificial grass, and some artificial grass categories are in plastic, some others are in actual grass, but they are done in some kind of industrial way. And all of those belong to like this notion of phylum or pseudo-phylum. And what I find interesting in the quote by Deleuze and Guattari is that it forces us to think about the connections between living beings. That's not something that we put the emphasis on in the book, but it could be interesting as a follow-up project, of course, to see the connections. For instance, what's the connection between a Roomba, a Tamagotchi, a plastic agglomerate, and some other kind of weird mushrooms or fungi that grows on technology, and that's. I mean, I mentioned this because I find it stimulating to probably revisit some of our categories.
Yeah, and that totally resonates with some of the issues and debates we had when we were trying to classify and to organize the content, because somehow this quote makes you want to reorganize or give access in a multidimensional way to those specimens, in the sense that obviously they don't connect together in only one dimensionality as we did with the kingdom of animals, minerals, and so on. But there are so much and so many other ways in which you can relate them, so that you could almost imagine a multidimensional organization and navigation in these sets of hybridity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. I see that we are now near the end, but I think there's a quick question that could be interesting to answer before we stop. A question by Stefan Blumer. So for your book, why did you choose Anthropocene as a term proposed by Paul Crutzen, and not Capitalocene or other kind of, I mean, probably if you're interested in this topic, you realize that the term Anthropocene was kind of criticized because anthro means human, but not all human beings are responsible for the state of our planet. And others have suggested Capitalocene, Cthulhucene, Plantationocene, like some of the authors that we have as guests in the book propose terms like that. I mean, personally, I think one of the reasons to use the term Anthropocene is that it's the one used by the Committee of Stratigraphy, the geologists working on this, and eventually some nuances exist in the text to describe that not all humans are responsible. And it's also because, sadly, it's the term that is the most commonly used, whereas others like Capitalocene are not as common. But I totally share the concern that using the term Anthropocene might give the wrong impression.
Yeah, it's also that there's a definition of, there's a nice friction with the term artificial, that it can be also understood as human-made. So like all these creatures are somehow created, not created, but
consequences.
Yeah, but inspired somehow by humans. So there are like unintentional consequences, but this was to put human as a human anthropogenic, make it centered around the human was kind of also choice, like with this discussion between notions of natural and artificial. Are we inside nature? Are we separated? What is artificial? So all these questions were like meshed together.
Yeah, that's a fair point. All right, I think that's pretty much it. It's time to leave you here. So thank you, Nicolas and Maria, for being with us today. And well, see you probably later with different kind of contribution in the Distortion Series festival. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye, thank you.
Thanks.